The first contact did not happen the way humanity had imagined. There were no flashing lights over major cities. There was no thunderous broadcast across every radio frequency on Earth. Instead, it happened quietly at the cold, dark rim of the solar system, where Neptune's storms churned in silence and humanity's farthest outpost, way station Caulux 9, floated like a silver seed in the black. Commander Deva Salinas was eating rehydrated noodles at 0300 station time when the proximity alarm screamed to life. She nearly choked. She set down her meal, wiped her mouth with the back of her sleeve, and crossed to the sensor console in 4 long strides. What she saw stopped her breath completely. 17 ships. Not human ships. Not anything built by human hands. They were enormous curved vessels, shaped like the inner spirals of a nautilus shell, each one glowing with a soft, shifting bioluminescent light, blue, then violet, then a green so deep it almost looked like a color that had no name in any human language. They moved with the slow, deliberate elegance of something that had never needed to hurry. Station control to Earth command. We have contact. Repeat. We have contact. Deva's voice was steady. She had trained for 15 years. She had run the simulation 600 times. But nothing, had prepared her for the sheer scale of what floated outside her viewport. Within 30 minutes, Earth command had scrambled. Within 2 hours, a translation ping arrived from the alien fleet. The signal carried a mathematical framework, then language. The message, once decoded, was disarmingly polite. We are the Vorath hegemony. We come to speak. We bring diplomats. We wish no harm. Deva forwarded the message to Earth and sat back in her chair. She looked at the 17 ships again. Diplomats. 17 ships full of diplomats. She had been in the military long enough to know that when someone showed up with that many ships and called them diplomats, you looked very carefully at what came behind them. Senior xenolinguist Oru Falk arrived on Caulux 9 aboard an emergency transport 48 hours later. He was a small, thin man with ink-stained fingers and the kind of focused eyes that made junior officers nervous. He had spent 22 years studying theoretical alien communication structures. Now he sat at the translation console and began the most important conversation in human history. The Vorath lead diplomat identified herself as High Arbiter Thesivan. Her translated voice was calm and unhurried, like water pouring over stone. She explained that the hegemony had been watching Earth for 3 centuries. They had seen humanity's potential. They had come to offer a place in the Galactic Accord, a coalition of 31 spacefaring civilizations that governed trade, territory, and interspecies law across a region of space spanning 600 light years. It sounded extraordinary. It sounded generous. It sounded almost too good. Oru listened carefully, and when Thesivan finished, he asked one question. What do you require in return? There was a pause long enough to fill a room with unease. You will disarm your military. Weapons above Class 4 designation must be surrendered or dismantled. This is the standard condition for entry into the Accord. Oru wrote the answer down by hand. Old habit. He looked at the words. He folded the paper and tucked it into his chest pocket. Then he sent one message to Earth Command, marked urgent, classified, and eyes only for the Secretary General. The message read, They want our teeth. Far away, in an underground facility beneath the Atacama Desert, a general named Yusra Melenda read that message. She read it twice. Then she picked up a different phone, one connected to a system that had been dormant for 11 years, and said 3 words into the receiver. Wake up, Goliath. Europa had always been a mystery. Beneath its fractured ice shell lay a liquid ocean warmed by Jupiter's gravitational embrace, and within that ocean humanity had built something that was never supposed to exist. Not officially. Not on any treaty document. Not in any public budget. Irongate facility had been constructed over 18 years by a rotating team of engineers, physicists, and military designers who had been told, with great seriousness, that their work would never be acknowledged if they succeeded, and would be called a geological accident if they failed. What they built was the GFS Sovereign Tide, the first Titan-class warship ever constructed by human hands. She was not built for exploration. She was not built for defense in the conventional sense. The Sovereign Tide was built as an answer to a question Earth had never stopped asking since the first radio telescope swept the sky. What do we do if something bigger comes and it does not come in peace? Engineer Admiral Castor Vrel had overseen the final 3 years of her construction. He was 56 years old, broad-shouldered, with a white scar along his jaw from a debris accident during the early Europa excavations. He loved the ship the way some people love their children, fiercely, quietly, and with a clear-eyed understanding of what she had been made to do. Sovereign Tide was 4.2 kilometers long. She carried a crew complement of 8,000, distributed across 47 decks. Her primary armament consisted of 6 Helion Cascade projectors, each capable of converting a small moon into vapor over 37 minutes. Her hull was layered in reactive quantum lattice plating, material that stiffened in proportion to the energy directed against it, meaning the harder you hit her, the harder she became. She carried 42 independent AI combat systems that could operate the ship in full autonomy for up to 6 months if all human crew were incapacitated. She was, by any honest measurement, a weapon that had no peer in any catalog of known human technology. When the activation order came through from General Yusra Melinda, Castor Vrel read it standing at his desk in the facility's engineering bay, surrounded by the hum of machinery and the faint creak of ice shifting overhead. He read it twice, the same way Melinda had read Orufalk's message. Then he walked to the main hangar bay, where Sovereign Tide rested in her berth like a sleeping continent. "Rise and shine," he said to no one in particular. The crew mobilization took 72 hours. Personnel were recalled from leave, from assignments, from their lives. No explanations were given beyond the classification code. They came anyway because that was what they had signed up for. Within 3 days, 8,000 human beings were aboard a ship that officially did not exist, preparing to travel to the edge of the solar system in response to a diplomatic situation that was rapidly becoming something else. Orufalk, still aboard Caulux 9, had continued his talks with High Arbiter Thesivan. He had been careful. He had been polite. He had asked questions designed to take time without appearing to stall, and Thesivan, for her part, seemed genuinely patient, though Oru had noticed that in the past 48 hours, 11 additional Vorath ships had appeared at the edge of the sensor array. The fleet now numbered 28. He reported this without emphasis in his nightly communication to Earth. Just a number. Just a data point. Earth Command read between the lines with the fluency of people who had been reading between lines for decades. Meanwhile, aboard the Sovereign Tide, a young tactical officer named Petra Imwe stood at the ship's primary holographic display and looked at the navigation projection for the first time. The route to Caulux 9. The spread of the alien fleet. The distances involved. She was 29 years old. She had never seen combat. She had graduated first in her class from the Mars Tactical Academy with a specialty in multi-vector engagement theory, which she had studied purely as an academic exercise, never expecting to apply it to an actual scenario involving actual alien warships. She looked at the 28 glowing dots on the display. "Admiral Vrel," she said carefully, "do you think they know we're coming?" Castor Vrel, standing behind her with his hands clasped, stared at the display for a long moment. "They've been watching us for 300 years, he said. "They know everything we let them know. And they probably know a few things we don't." He paused. "That's fine. So do we." The Sovereign Tide broke free of Europa's ice shelf on a Tuesday morning, station time. She rose through the dark water of that ancient ocean, punched through the ice ceiling in a shower of crystalline debris, and emerged into the clean blackness of space for the first time. Jupiter hung massive and silent to her port side, its storms rolling in bands of amber and white. Castor Vrel watched from the command deck as Europa shrank behind them, and felt, for the first time in years, the particular kind of calm that comes when a long preparation finally meets its purpose. The conference room aboard Caulux 9's diplomatic module had been decorated by someone who had clearly tried very hard and knew almost nothing about alien aesthetics. There were potted plants from Earth, small, carefully maintained, a touch of green in the gray metal space. There was a long table made from recycled hull alloy, polished to a mirror shine. There were chairs on one side for the human delegation, and a low platform on the other side because the Vorath, it turned out, did not sit. Orufalk stood behind his chair rather than sitting, out of what he considered professional courtesy. Commander Deva Solinas stood beside him, arms loose at her sides, reading the room with the trained attention of a soldier who had survived 3 combat deployments by noticing things other people missed. High Arbiter Thesivan was exactly as impressive in person as her voice suggested. She stood nearly 3 meters tall, her body a fluid assembly of interlocking bioplates that shifted like the scales of a living creature when she moved. Her face, or the structure that served the function of a face, carried 4 deep-set optical organs that caught the light and held it. She was accompanied by 2 subordinate diplomats, Vorath officials called Rathanex, who remained at the edges of the room and said nothing. "We appreciate your willingness to continue dialogue," Oru began. His translator device rendered his words into the Vorath harmonic pattern in real time. "We have reviewed the terms of the Galactic Accord with great care." "And your decision?" Thesivan asked. There was a texture to her translated voice that Oru had begun to identify as something like polite pressure. Not threat. Not quite. But the kind of tone that expected a particular answer. We have questions, Oru said. The disarmament provision, it applies to all member species equally? It has applied to all 31 current members of the Accord. Pause. Some required more persuasion than others. Deva's eyes moved slightly, just enough for Oru to notice. He kept his expression neutral. And species that decline membership? He asked. They remain outside the Accord's protections, Thesivan said. Trade networks, medical exchange programs, navigational rights within Accord territory, these are unavailable to non-members. Another pause longer than the ones before it. It would be unfortunate for a species with such obvious potential to find itself isolated. There it was. Oru had been waiting for it. The velvet around the iron. May I ask a clarifying question about the nature of the Accord's protection structure? He said. Specifically, if a member species faces external threat, what is the response mechanism? The Accord fleet mobilizes in defense of all members. The Accord fleet. Not the member species' own fleet. Correct. Member species do not maintain offensive capability. The Accord provides unified defense. Or let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. So the arrangement is, we give up our weapons and in exchange someone else protects us. Someone with vastly superior capability, yes. That is very kind, Oru said, with a warmth so genuine it took Thesivan a moment to notice it was not agreement. The session broke for what the Vorath called a reflective interval and what Deva privately called a bathroom break. She and Oru stepped into the corridor outside the conference module. The corridor had no windows, but they both knew that 28 alien ships were currently parked within strike range of the station. How long do we need? Deva asked quietly. Sovereign tide is 31 hours out, Oru said. He was looking at the wall but not at it. Can you stall that long? I've been stalling for 6 days. I have extensive experience. He looked at her sideways. The problem is they're not stupid. They know I'm stalling. Thesivan's been running circles around my evasions with the practiced ease of someone who's done this 31 times before. Deva thought about that. 31 member species. 31 negotiations. 31 civilizations that had handed over their weapons and joined an arrangement where someone else held the sword. What's your read? She asked. My read, Oru said, is that the Accord is exactly what they say it is. Trade. Law. Protection. Genuine benefits. He paused. And also a system specifically designed so that no individual species ever becomes powerful enough to challenge the hegemony that runs it. Not a villain's scheme, Deva said. Just a very well-managed empire. One that has operated without serious opposition for approximately 600 years. He straightened up. Until, potentially now. Back in the conference room, when the session resumed, Oru introduced a new document, a counterproposal Earth had spent the previous 72 hours preparing. It was detailed, respectful, and fundamentally proposed that Earth join the Accord while maintaining a limited defensive capability, subject to mutual inspection and agreed thresholds. It was not what the Accord required. It was what Earth could live with. Thesivan read it without moving for a very long time. Then she said, "This is not how membership works." "We understand," Oru said pleasantly. "We think it could be." It was not a rejection. It was not an acceptance. It was a counter to the counter, which meant the negotiation would continue. It bought time. Not much. But enough. 31 hours away, moving at a speed that no Vorath sensor array had yet detected because humanity had spent 40 years quietly solving that particular problem, the Sovereign Tide pressed on through the dark. The Vorath detected Sovereign Tide at a range of approximately 400,000 kilometers. That was close. Unsettlingly close, by the standards of any species that had been operating in space long enough to understand what 400,000 kilometers meant when a 4.2-kilometer-long warship was the thing you were failing to detect. It meant the ship had been essentially invisible until it chose not to be. The Vorath sensor operators aboard the fleet flagships had, by all subsequent accounts, a very bad few minutes. High Arbiter Thesivan received the alert mid-sentence, in the middle of what had been a fairly productive back and forth with Oru about inspection protocols. She stopped speaking. The environmental bioplates across her body shifted in a pattern that Oru had come to recognize as the Vorath equivalent of a sharp intake of breath. The two Rathaneks at the edges of the room moved simultaneously toward the exit. "Arbiter?" Oru said, with the careful tone of someone who already knows what has happened. Thesivan turned her 4 optical sensors toward him. "You have a warship." We have several, Oru said pleasantly. That one is the largest. It was not on any human registry we have reviewed. No, Oru agreed. It wasn't. The communication channel between the conference module and the Vorath flagship opened without request. An emergency override which told Oru something important about the psychological state of the people using it. A Vorath fleet commander's translated voice filled the room, sharp and stripped of the diplomatic softness the Sivan had maintained throughout. Human station. Identify the vessel at bearing 477. Classify and declare its intentions. Deva Salinas, standing at the room's secondary communication panel, responded before Oru could. Her voice was entirely level. Galactic Fleet Ship Sovereign Tide. Titan Class. Intentions, diplomatic support. A silence followed that had a very specific texture. The texture of 28 warship commanders recalculating everything they thought they knew. Aboard the Sovereign Tide, Castor Vrel stood at the command deck and watched Calux 9 grow on the forward display. Beside it, arranged in their Nautilus spiral formations, the Vorath fleet. He had the weapons array warm but cold dark, powered and ready but not radiating any targeting signature. It was the spatial equivalent of keeping your hand near your holster without touching it. Tactical Officer Petra Imwe was at her station, running numbers she had already run 14 times. The Vorath fleet outmassed Sovereign Tide by approximately 8-1 in total tonnage. They outgunned her in raw energy output by a factor of perhaps 6. But Titan-class ships were not designed to win through attrition. They were designed to change the calculation entirely. The quantum lattice hull. The AI combat subsystems. The Helion cascade projectors, which had never been fired in combat but whose theoretical output Petra had modeled against every known Vorath weapon system. The models came out differently each time depending on assumptions. But they always had the same shape. A fight would be devastating for everyone and uncertain for both sides. That was the point. That had always been the point. Not to win a war. To make a war unthinkable. Castor Vrel opened a direct channel to Calux 9. Commander Salinas. We are in position. How are the talks going? Deva's voice came back dry as dust. Interestingly. Do you need us to do anything? Just be visible, she said. Very, very visible. He cut the channel and turned to his communications officer. Broadcast our full technical specifications on open frequency. Every registered Vorath channel. Everything. Armor classification, weapon systems, AI combat rating. All of it. His comms officer, a young man named Fenaduro who had never expected to be part of history, blinked at him. Sir? That's classified. Not anymore, Castor said. Today it's a business card. The specifications went out. Across the Vorath fleet, translators worked furiously. Officers read numbers and read them again. The hegemony had been watching Earth for 300 years. They had watched humanity crawl from atmospheric flight to solar system navigation. They had watched with the patient confidence of a civilization that had seen this pattern 31 times. A young species impressive within its own small sphere, naive about the scale of what it was joining. They had not watched closely enough. Back in Conference Module 7, the Sivan had been still for a long time. The kind of stillness that is the absence of motion in a creature that is thinking very fast. You built this without our knowledge, she said finally. We built it without anyone's knowledge, Oru said. That was rather the purpose. You understood we were coming. Oru tilted his head slightly. We understood something might come eventually. We are a species that prepares for things. He paused. We find it useful. The Sivan looked at him with all four eyes. The Accord has never encountered a new species that arrived at first contact with a Titan-class vessel. I would imagine not, Oru said. We are somewhat unusual. There was a long pause. Your counter-proposal, the Sivan said slowly. The one regarding limited defensive capability under mutual inspection. Oru folded his hands on the table. Yes. I would like to resume discussion of its specific parameters. Oru Falk, Xenolinguist who had been awake for approximately 37 hours, allowed himself one small, quiet smile. Of course, he said. We have all the time in the world. Oru Falk had never been aboard an alien ship before. As far as he knew, no human being had. When Thesivan extended the invitation, framed as a courtesy but carrying the unmistakable weight of a diplomatic signal, he accepted without hesitation and spent the transit shuttle ride reading everything he had ever written about Vorath cultural theory and quietly deciding most of it was probably wrong. The interior of the Thessalorn was not what he expected. He had imagined something austere and alien, defined by the logic of a biology and culture utterly unlike humanity's own. Instead, he found something that was, in its bones, surprisingly familiar. A working space full of the organized clutter of people doing complex jobs. Screens, different geometry, different interface, but screens. Organized stations. The sense of a place where decisions were made. Thesivan met him in a chamber near the vessel's center, a room that seemed designed specifically for meetings. Curved walls that caught and softened the bioluminescent light, a low table between them, the two Rathaneks positioned at the room's periphery once again. She began without preamble. I want to understand something. Not as a diplomatic position. As a question. Of course, Oru said. Your species has had the theoretical capacity to build that ship for approximately 30 years. You built it in secret. You maintained that secret for 18 years across thousands of personnel. In a species as communicative and politically fractured as humanity. She paused. How? Oru considered the question seriously, which he always did, because he thought casual answers to serious questions were a form of disrespect. We are good at secrets when we believe the stakes are high enough, he said. And we have a particular gift for disagreeing about almost everything except a few fundamental things. Our territorial integrity is one of them. Our right to determine our own future is another. You feared the Accord. We didn't know about the Accord. We feared the abstract possibility of something like it. He paused. Which amounts to the same result. Thesivan was quiet for a moment. 31 species have joined the Accord. Most came to us. We did not seek them. The benefits of membership are genuine. I believe you, Oru said. Entirely. And yet, he agreed. The disarmament requirement. That's the piece we cannot accept. Not because we distrust you specifically, Arbiter. But because we are a species that has learned, across a very long and rather painful history, that the moment you hand your weapons to someone else is the moment you stop being able to choose your own path. He looked at her steadily. Your arrangement works beautifully for species willing to trust the hegemony's judgment about when and how they should be protected. We are not those species. We have protected all 31 members faithfully. Yes. And made 31 sets of decisions about their protection without their meaningful input. He leaned forward slightly. What happens when your judgment and our interests diverge? Thesivan did not answer immediately. This, Oru noted, was interesting. The Vorath High Arbiter, who had conducted 31 first-contact negotiations with practiced mastery, was sitting with a question rather than reflexively answering it. That meant the question was real. You would propose a different structure, she said at last. We would propose a partnership, Oru said. Full membership in the Accord's trade networks, medical exchange, navigational rights, all of it. Contribution to the Accord fleet in proportion to our capacity. And retention of our own defensive capability, capped at agreed levels, subject to transparent mutual inspection. He paused. We are not proposing to threaten anyone. We are proposing to sit at the table as adults. No species has ever sat at our table on those terms. No species has ever arrived at your table with a Titan-class warship, Oru said. Not unkindly. Another silence. Longer this time. Through the chamber walls, faint and translated by the ship's systems, he could hear the working sounds of the flagship. The hum of systems, the movement of crew. A civilization that had been operating continuously for longer than humanity had had writing. 31 species integrated into a framework that functioned, that traded, that genuinely protected its members. It was, Oru reflected, a remarkable thing. It was also a thing that had never had to reckon with a species that looked at it and said, with complete respect and zero apology, not quite. If I were to bring your proposal before the full Accord Council, Thesivan said slowly, there would be significant opposition. I would expect nothing less, Oru said. We are patient. And we are good at making arguments. You are good at many things we did not anticipate. Oru smiled. We have been told that before. He folded his hands on the low table. We have been building things in secret for a very long time, Arbiter. We have been planning for conversations like this one for longer than you have been watching us. We did not know who would come or when or what they would want. But we knew, with a confidence built from thousands of years of our own history, that the conversation would eventually come. He met her four-eyed gaze directly. We wanted to arrive at it as equals. The room was quiet. The bioluminescent light shifted from violet to a deep, steady blue, and Oru, who had spent 22 years studying alien communication, noted that none of his research had told him what that color change meant in this context. He decided it was probably something positive. He decided this because the alternative was not useful. After a very long moment, the Sivan said, "Tell me more about your inspection protocols." And Oru Falk, who had not slept properly in 9 days, began to talk. The journey to Vorath Prime took 3 months. Humanity spent most of those 3 months arguing about it, which was, as Oru Falk had noted to the Sivan, exactly what humanity did. The debate was global, immediate, and extraordinarily loud. Every government had an opinion. Every think tank produced a position paper. Every citizen with access to a communication network shared their view, often multiple times. In the end, the argument that won was not the most eloquent or the most comprehensive. It was delivered by a retired firefighter from Lagos named Tom Idachik, who stood up at a town hall session that was being broadcast across the planet and said, "We spent 18 years building a ship we hoped we'd never need, so that when strangers came to our door, we could open it ourselves and decide who comes in. Now we're going to let strangers tell us what to do with our own door? We didn't build that ship for nothing." Nobody has ever satisfactorily explained why that particular speech, delivered by that particular person in that particular city, was the one that finally crystallized the global consensus. These things happen sometimes. History is full of moments that should not have been pivotal but were. The delegation that traveled to Vorath Prime was 12 people. Oru Falk was its head, which surprised no one who had watched the negotiations. Commander Deva Salinas was its security lead, which also surprised no one. The other 10 included an economist, a biologist, 2 lawyers with specializations in international treaty law, a physician, a cultural historian, an engineer, a teenager who had won the global youth essay competition on the topic of interstellar diplomacy and whose parents were justifiably astonished, and Petra Imwe, the tactical officer, who had been included because Castor Vrel had written in her recommendation that she thought in ways that made everyone around her better, which he considered more important than any other qualification. Vorath Prime was not what any of them had imagined, which was exactly what they had expected, because they had all individually prepared themselves to be surprised and been surprised anyway. It was a world of extraordinary layered complexity, cities that grew vertically into the atmosphere and horizontally into the ocean floor, connected by transit systems that moved in 3 dimensions simultaneously. The population was immense and incredibly varied. The Accord's 31 member species had permanent embassies here, and the city districts that housed them were a collision of architectures and atmospheric conditions and sensory experiences that made the human delegation feel very small and very alive simultaneously. The council chamber was vast. It was designed to accommodate representatives of 31 different species, each with different physical requirements, different communication needs, different cultural protocols around the act of deliberation. The result was a room that felt, somehow, both deeply alien and deeply familiar, a space built for the universal purpose of people trying to work things out. 31 sets of eyes, many more than 31 actual eyes, given the variation in ocular anatomy, turned toward the human delegation as they entered. Oru had prepared a speech. He had prepared 7 different versions of it, accounting for different possible atmospheres in the room. He read the room and selected version 4, the one that began not with argument but with acknowledgement. "We are grateful to be here," he said, and he meant it completely. "We are a young species measured in any scale you would use to judge us. We have been spacefaring for less than 2 centuries. We have made extraordinary mistakes throughout our history and will undoubtedly make more. We do not come here claiming to be superior or wiser than any civilization in this room." He paused, letting the translation devices work. "We come here claiming something different. We claim the right to make our own mistakes and our own successes, in our own way with our own hands on our own controls." He looked around the chamber slowly. "We do not think this makes us difficult partners. We think it makes us honest ones. A partner who has agreed to everything you've asked is a partner who may secretly resent you for asking. A partner who has negotiated with you until you both arrived at something you can both live with, that is a partner you can trust." The deliberations lasted 4 days. Oru had expected weeks. The 4 days were both a relief and, he privately admitted, slightly anxiety-inducing, because fast decisions in complex rooms could mean many things. But he watched the debates through the translation feeds, and what he heard was not the dismissal he feared. What he heard was curiosity. The Accord's other 31 species were curious about humans. Not threatened. Not insulted. Curious. Several of their representatives had obtained copies of Sovereign Tide's technical specifications from the open broadcast Castor Vrel had made at Neptune, and the engineers among them had opinions about the quantum lattice hull that were translated from 3 different alien languages, roughly equivalent to "that's genuinely clever." On the 4th day the council voted. 26 in favor of the modified membership proposal. 4 opposed. 1 abstention. When Oru heard the result, he sat very still for a moment. Then he wrote 2 words on a piece of paper, folded it, and put it in his chest pocket. Old habit. The words were, "We're in." Back at Europa, Castor Vrel received the news via tight beam transmission and spent a long moment looking at Jupiter through Irongate Facility's viewport. Jupiter, which had watched over the construction of Sovereign Tide for 18 years without comment, because Jupiter was a planet and did not comment on things, but Castor had spent so much time here that it had begun to feel like a witness. He thought about the ship resting in her berth, waiting again. He thought about the 8,000 people who had made that journey and come home. He thought about what it meant that humanity had just done something that had never been done before in 600 years of Accord history. Then he went to get dinner because it had been a long year. The building that became the Geneva Interstellar Relations Center had previously been used for storage. Its conversion, carried out over 8 months of focused international effort, produced a complex that was partly human and partly not, because 3 of the Accord's member species had sent architectural advisors who contributed design elements from their own traditions, and the result was a structure that looked like nothing humanity had built before and everything humanity had always been building toward. A place for meeting, for talking, for working out the endlessly complicated business of sharing a universe. Oru Falk's office was on the 4th floor with a window that faced the Alps. He had requested that specifically because he found mountains calming, and he had a feeling that what came next would require frequent calmness. 1 year after the council vote, he sat at his desk and looked at the stack of documents that represented the ongoing project of being humanity's newest and most extraordinary undertaking. Trade protocols with 7 Accord species, each requiring separate negotiation because each species had different economic structures and different things they valued and different ways of expressing value. Cultural exchange programs with 4 more, which were simultaneously the most delightful and most logistically complex things he had ever been involved with. A joint medical research program with the Drevithi, the Accord's most advanced biological science civilization, who had already contributed 3 therapeutic frameworks that human researchers were describing in their papers as revolutionary, a word they apparently felt needed to be used in every single abstract, because Oru had read 17 of them. And then there were the ongoing conversations about Sovereign Tide. The Accord's acceptance of modified membership had not resolved the question of Earth's military capacity, it had simply created a framework within which the question could be discussed honestly. Some Accord species were uncomfortable with it. Some were fascinated. 2 had quietly and separately approached Earth's Defense Ministry to ask, with what Oru recognized as tremendous diplomatic delicacy, whether Earth would be willing to share certain aspects of the quantum lattice hull technology. Earth had said it would consider it, which was true, and was also the diplomatic equivalent of "let's talk more," which was also true, and which suited Oru's general approach to everything enormously. Deva Solinas had been appointed Earth's first interstellar security liaison, a title that had required 3 separate committees to agree on and which meant, in practice, that she was responsible for managing the relationship between Earth's military capacity and the Accord's collective security apparatus. She was also, technically, Oru's equal in the organizational hierarchy of the Geneva Center, which meant they argued about resource allocation with the cheerful frequency of people who had been through something extraordinary together and emerged with deep mutual respect and zero inclination to defer to each other. Petra Imwe had returned to active duty aboard the Sovereign Tide, now officially commissioned under a designation that appeared in all the appropriate public registries, the first of her class to be acknowledged, though not the last. There were 2 more Titan-class ships in various stages of construction at facilities that were now, in keeping with the modified membership terms, subject to Accord inspection. The inspectors who had visited Europa had reportedly spent 3 days touring the facility and then filed a report that was described by the Accord's inspection chief as the most thorough documentation of a single military asset in the organization's history, and which Castor Vrel had read with the quiet satisfaction of an engineer being truly seen. The essay competition winner, a 16-year-old named Selim Vura from Harare, was enrolled at the new Interstellar Studies program at the University of Cape Town, which had been running for approximately 7 months and already had a 3-year waiting list. She sent Oru a message occasionally to tell him things she was learning, which he appreciated, because the things a 16-year-old noticed in a new discipline were frequently the most important things. The 4 Accord species that had voted against modified membership had not, as far as Oru could tell, softened their position. But they were engaging with the new situation, which was all he had asked for. Engagement. Conversation. The slow, grinding, endlessly frustrating and occasionally transcendent work of people from genuinely different worlds trying to find enough common ground to stand on. On a Wednesday afternoon, 6 months into his Geneva posting, Oru received a communication from High Arbiter Thesivan. It was personal rather than formal, a distinction in Vorath diplomatic protocol that he had been told about but had not yet experienced directly. The message was relatively short. It described a situation on the outer edge of Accord territory, a young spacefaring species recently detected showing signs of rapid technological development. The hegemony was preparing a first contact mission. Thesivan's question, translated with the careful precision of someone who understood the weight of what she was asking, was this: would Earth like to be involved? Oru read the message 3 times. He looked out his window at the Alps. He thought about a station at the edge of the solar system, and 17 ships glowing like living creatures in the dark, and a general in the Atacama Desert who had said 3 words into a phone. He thought about what it had cost to get here and what it was worth and what it would mean to be on the other side of that question now, to be one of the people who showed up with ships to meet someone new. He thought about it carefully. He thought about the responsibility in it. He thought about how easy it would be to become exactly what they had resisted, if they were not intentional about what they wanted to be. Then he opened a new document and began to write a proposal. A different kind of proposal than Earth had ever written before. One that started not with capabilities or conditions or demands, but with a question. What does this new species need to arrive at the table as equals? Was a good question. He thought they might be the right species to ask it. Outside the Geneva Center, the Alps rose against the sky in their permanent, patient way, and the world went on with the business of becoming something larger than itself, which was, Oru had come to believe, the only business that had ever really mattered.